The success of Boxing Helena on Laserdisc, which went a lot further than the success that it had in the motion picture theaters, begs the question, is this a more intimate movie? Does it work better on a small screen than on a large screen?
I think so. I believe that the film got a lot of unjust sensationalism through the media, you know, in the reviews and just the coverage due to the basing or trial. And people stayed away from it. They thought it was a, you know, hack 'em up, cut off her arms and legs, blood on the wall type of film. And ultimately, the word of mouth, I think, has spread that it obviously is not that kind of film. And people have ventured to screen it in the safety of their home. Also, Laserdisc particularly, I think, demonstrates the high production value better than any other form, because ultimately, when you're in a movie theater, you don't have control over outdated projectors and bulbs and sound, and clearly the Laserdisc is going to put our best foot forward.
Jennifer, for you, does it work better on a small screen?
You know, I think that it works better for the audience on a small screen. It's certainly, I think, in the same way, easier for me to view because I am not so hypercritical of what is being thought of me if I react out loud or if I even fidget. I think that, you know, when I was at screenings, a lot of the time, people in the audience were truly concerned that opinions were going to be made of them based on what they thought of this film. And when this sort of became gospel, I don't know, but I do think that the appropriate forum for a voyeuristic sort of dark fairy tale about what goes on in our private mind is, you know, best viewed, you know, in the home. Absolutely. I think that that's what I think that's what has made it tantalizing, definitely, is that it's sort of that, oh, we rented Boxing Helena. You know, it's a sneaky sort of treat as opposed to the public statement. I mean, there were people picketing, and a lot of people will not walk into a theater, you know, if they see women's groups outside.
You wrote the script.
Yes.
You spent a lot of time dealing with this and polishing it, and obviously, you know, little bits of brain cells came out on the page. So,
which is why I'm like this now.
So, you know, so there was a lot of you in this. I mean, what's the deepest part of you in this film?
Oh my goodness. To be quite candid with you, almost everything in it is sort of in that deep well that is me, if there's a way to say that without sounding like a black turtleneck coffee house kind of gal. My earliest memory is of sort of feeling the weight of my parents' panic at what had sort of been born to them. You know, all this responsibility and such, and I was born with a physical condition called club feet, which was a fairly severe case, and I was put in casts the day after I was born, and had orthopedic shoes and a sort of a contraption on me for many years, and felt sort of initially very much, I think, the way Nick feels in the film, like a burden, which isn't necessarily true, but for Nick it was. For me, I know it wasn't. And broken, like a failed person. And there's no going back into the womb and getting another month out of it. You know what I mean? You're here now. And I think that because I felt sort of busted up and broken and imperfect, if you will, a lot of the hopes and aspirations and dreams I had were based on that sort of fairy tale quality of it's all magic. A pumpkin turns into a carriage and you don't die, you just eat an apple and sleep forever. But maybe a prince will come along and wake you up. There was all these infinite possibilities and things, and most importantly, I learned, I think, the great lesson of my life, which is sort of what Nick falls in love with the Venus, and that is that in my grandmother's home, when I was being raised in Philadelphia, and throughout my visits there, she has this small statuette of the Venus de Milo. And, you know, this is a broken statue. And yet, over the years, I remember I can see them just in these sort of silent shots of people moving by, looking at this statue, and looking at it with love and awe, as if it was this beautiful, very whole, perfect thing. And there was suddenly this point made to me that maybe it doesn't have to do with this, the idea of being whole and being able to be loved and being able to love somebody back, and all of the sort of issues that I think as little tiny people we have on our minds. And Nick sees the Venus de Milo as that kind of lesson experience too. It's a beautiful, very whole thing that does not reject him, and it's the only thing for Nick that does not reject him.
Is a woman less beautiful, less desirable if she's imperfect? Is she less desirable if she's flawed? Or, because that's really what this film is about and what you were describing about yourself.
Right, I mean, I think that very definitely, and it's an interesting way to put it, is that I think that we're striving for all this sort of perfection, and we have these societal stereotypes because we are convinced we are flawed as we are as individuals. And there's a whole lot of pressure on this. We all want to be great-looking, wonderful, fun to be around people, with people loving us. Nick is attracted to exactly what has hurt him all of his life. A beautiful woman who says nothing to him but, this is wrong with you, this is wrong with you, I hate you, leave me alone. You're a joke, which is exactly what his mother said, is essentially what his father said, aside from, you will be a surgeon. I think that we are drawn repeatedly in a sort of act of insanity, trying to get it right each time, to the people who abuse us. And that's why Helena exists with Ray. Ray is about making sure Helena doesn't learn that there's a nice person inside this.
There must have been a time while this film was being put together when you thought to yourself, this thing's never going to get made. I'm pulling the plug on this thing, and I'm going to get on with my life. This is craziness. And I'm sure that you and Jennifer commiserated on that. Was there really a time when you believed, the towel was in the air, you throw in the towel, and this puppy's not going to come to life?
Probably privately at some point, but never to anyone but myself. Marty, you have to understand that I sort of dedicated my life to be a producer from age 7. I knew I wanted to do this, and I went to film school and worked my way up the ladder on 15 different major film projects before I started my own company, and then evoked the support of many close friends back east to help finance this picture. So when it was about to tank, or did several times, had I thrown in the towel, I would have been throwing in on my career, because I would never have been given an opportunity like I was given on this particular film. So for me to say, I quit, everyone else did. Every actor quit. There was even a time for 2 weeks I lost Jennifer, but I never gave up the faith. I think that I was partly like Nick. My obsession grew. And the challenge of hearing the word no, which is a word I've always hated growing up, just fueled my fight all the way through the courtroom and all the way through the MPAA until we're sitting here. This is the last chapter. Now we've been fortunate enough to have our opportunity to say our side of the story and what the film means to us. And it finally is it's fabulous closure. On to the next.
I mean, I knew I was going to have a very magical relationship. However wickedly magical at times it may have been for both of us. From the very second I met Carl, something was very good about it and very special. And I think that, well, when I was moving into a new apartment when I first met him, I'd had my first meeting. 2 days later, the refrigerator's on a dolly behind me. I've got the phone in my hand and the keys to my new apartment. I walk in, plug the phone in, move so the refrigerator can come in behind me, and it's ringing as I stick it in, and it's Carl. And he says, hey, you want to make a movie? And from that point on, do-do-do-do-do-do-do.
That's interesting.
And so when I was under the covers for 2 weeks, at one point, literally in bed for 2 weeks under the covers, like, and he was calling, saying, don't give up, don't give up. Not only did I know it was somehow going to be okay, but I knew he would let me have 2 weeks to sort of,
Everyone needed to quit. I mean,
Yeah,
at some point it was a cathartic experience to quit, and unfortunately I was too busy holding up too many loose ends to quit, but...
You want to quit now?
Let me ask you this. You go to sleep at night, you had a particularly, crummy day. I mean, Basinger's off the thing, you're sitting there, the crew is sitting, talking to you and going, hey, Mazzocone, are we going to make this movie or not? I got things to do, I got the rent to pay. And you're going, no, we're going to straighten it out and this, that, and the other thing. And you go home at night, and you get into bed and turn off the lights, and you put your head on the pillow.
You have to refresh my worst nightmare.
And you think there, because I've been there, and it's like, you know, what do you think about? Do you think about tomorrow's another day?
It was truly the blackest of black. It was beyond midnight. It's actually worse than that, Marnie, because ultimately when she quit, for the second time we had to fire a couple hundred people. For the second time we've lost in excess of $500,000 in pre-production expenses that, you know, we'll probably never get back. And it was so overwhelming, there were so many problems that if I looked at all my problems at one particular time with one single vision, it would have been overwhelming. What I did was I looked at my problems in little compartments and thought to myself, strategized, how can I fix this? And then walked away from that, and how can I fix this next problem? And dealing with it in that way, I was able to survive emotionally, intellectually, mentally, and find the strength to fight the battles.
So the problem was solved, for lack of a better term, by the sum of its parts.
I think the problem was solved by sheer tenacity and never giving up. I mean, there was a point where Jennifer was convinced that the town didn't want the movie made, that the quote-unquote powers to be were killing it. I don't believe in that.
Oh,
See,
there was a little bit of proof.
oh, clearly they were influencing it, but I don't believe that they are the end-all. I believe that you are in control of your own destiny.
Oh, that much
And
is true. Yeah.
if you keep the faith, you can weather any storm.
I want to give credit, only because I think it's so spectacular, is the photography. Frank Byer's work was extraordinary. And I think that looking at it, there are touches of your dad's work, of David Lynch's work, looking at it not unlike the fact that Frank Byers had just come over from Twin Peaks to go and shoot it, but the look was there. And the magic of it is that the relationship, the intimacy between a director of photography and a director, when it works, it's phenomenal. You can keep watching this film over and over again just because of the look of the film. I wanted to give recognition to Frank. I also wanted to ask you something, Carl, because we've had so many discussions on it. The choice of music is extremely eclectic. I mean, ranging from Lenny Kravitz to Enigma to Puccini. What was your thought? Is music a big bag for you?
It is, and equally for Jennifer, I must say, we were looking, searching for the right feel. And the neat thing about the whole design of the picture is that it's not particularly lends itself to any one city or any time. It's sort of timeless. So when we put rock and roll in, which was our initial reaction in the party sequences, it always felt sort of awkward. And I've recently had an incredible passion for opera, and Jennifer and I were sitting around listening to the Three Tenors, and Pavarotti has obviously added so much to the opera world and bringing so many new listeners into it. And it was like putting the square peg in the square hole. It just fit so perfectly. And when I was searching for all these songs and passing them to Jennifer, and she was inspired equally, and it just worked. Wouldn't you say?
Absolutely, and again, because this sort of goes with music and with Frank Byers. Both of the beautiful things about the quality of those is that we're not telling a dark tale, but much like Twin Peaks, which is why not only does he have a brilliant dialogue with his directors, he's a very good listener, but he's a painter with film, I think, and that he knows what you can really have a very strong, as you said, dialogue with him. And there's a dreamer in Frank. Nothing is impossible until he's tried it twice. And that's a beautiful quality to have in somebody. And with the music, you can still have a dog if you cut its tail off. You just have a very individual type of dog. And in certain spaces, I think the hardest part for Carl and I to decide was where not to have it. I was very particular about where I was afraid to have it because I didn't want it to guide the audience's opinions. I was equally as curious about the results, and that, with the fairy tale, again, all of this romance, as heavy-handed as sort of classical music can be sometimes in opera, it is equally as heart-wrenching and affecting. And it seemed very appropriate that Nick be constantly playing these sort of evocative arias and operas for Helena, as it was, It's a beautiful, beautiful choice.
One word missing in this whole dialogue, and that it's the word passion. The music was passionate, the film was passionate, and the people that were drawn to the picture, the entire crew, realized that it was a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity to work on a movie like this. So when you have a Frank Byers who's passionate for the material, it can't help but to translate on the screen. And that holds true for everyone who worked on the movie.
Yeah, I mean, we were very lucky and fortunate to have crew members, especially after the third try. If anybody came back, they came back out of the love of the project.
They proved themselves for this project.
Exactly. And if they were drawn to it equally at that point, it was because they were passionate about the material and were curious. And that was what I think lent itself to the energy of survival on the set. Regardless of how hard it got sometimes, it was like a bunch of kids inventing something and creating something. None of us knew it was going to be okay. We hoped it would be. And it was a beautiful, magical thing. It was just a lot of, you know.
It turned out very okay. You know, talking about the people that worked on the show and behind the camera, I want to ask you some things about the people in front of the camera. Just some adjectives, not long, but flashes, you know, basically sort of like Rorschach tests. Bill Paxton.
Wonderful, wild, very, very brave, and very brave and fearless, and I think they're different things. Bill will do anything if he believes his character would do it.
Sherilyn Fenn.
Again, very brave. I don't know if she's ever been given the recognition for that. That was a really tough thing to do, let alone who she was following up in the press's eyes.
Was that a thing for her? I mean, the fact that she wasn't Madonna and she wasn't Kim Basinger, she was flawed in herself before she even hit the screen because she was third.
I think that, absolutely, well, I think it's 50-50. I think that at times that was as much a boost to her. She was the one who showed up. She was the one who was doing it, you know, gold star. As much as it was, oh my God, I have the reputations of two women I don't even necessarily relate to in any other way except that they're sort of competitors in the same field for this role, and my arms and legs are being cut off. And I have to pretend not to care.
Julian Sands. Carl?
To me, a true friend. He was the backbone of the whole movie. Julian realized from years of making independent movies what it took to make an independent movie, and did everything it took. He was there 10 minutes early, always prepared, and always willing to lend a hand in anything, up to today when we did our narration. A true professional and a very dear friend.
He looked very directable. I mean, he looked as though when you directed him, he got it.
Absolutely. I mean, Julian was like a wonderful, wonderful sponge. He was so, and you know, he opened my eyes to all sorts of things about Nick that I hadn't allowed for. The idea that Nick be handsome was something that I sort of hadn't. I wanted him to be attractive, and I wanted him to be somebody you could sort of fall in love with, you know, through your heart less than your eyes. And I think that because he is a very masculine, big, strong man, to have him, he was very willing to sort of castrate himself emotionally and physically a bit on screen, and that's a very bold, brave thing to do, and it was appropriate to the character, and I think that he really lent some genuine softness and humor to what could have otherwise simply been grinding.
Has your dad seen the film?
Yes, he has.
Did you see it? Did you watch it while he was watching it?
Yes. We sat next to each other the whole time. He wouldn't watch it unless I sat next to him, and I just thought, man, he's getting me back for everything that's ever happened.
Right.
And he had tears in his eyes at the end, and he said, "Where in the hell did you learn how to do that?" And it was very. It was really wonderful. I mean, I remember it very vividly too. My father having, you know, read the screenplay. I was 19 years old, and he looked at me and he said, "Oh, I could never make this film. It's too scary." You know, and by that he meant the weight of walking that fine line between. And if the world had let anybody make the film, they probably would have picked David Lynch. You know, who's the guy who should do it?
Right.
And that was equally as inspiring to me as it was terrifying. You know, I mean, my father is as is my mother, probably two of my closest friends, and he was so open and honest, and yet stayed completely away, had enough faith in me to leave me alone, because I said I did not want help. I wanted this to be my mistake or my success, or variations on that theme. But I needed to know when I went to bed at night and woke up in the morning that I was responsible for what was going on, and that it wasn't, because people I knew would assume, as they have, regardless of whether or not he was involved, that he had been. And that was, I think, also, you know, a strange expectation put on the film.
Well,
That, oh, then it must be bloody and gory and twisted and
but it's not bloody and it's not gory. It's a little twisted.
right. I mean, the car accident and the fight, there's blood, but it's very...
But the car accident is a flinch.
Split
I mean,
second.
it's 12 frames. I mean, it's not, it's like that.
Beast.
Besides your dad, who saw the film that you held their breath and sort of waited?
Oh, my mother.
Your mother? And what did she say when she saw the film?
She just couldn't have been more sort of exhilarated and excited. I was so happy to see her when the lights came up in a state of happiness.
Right.
And like, you know, she got right down to the end of the credits and nothing had bothered her. You know, and another thing too is when my mother first heard I was writing this screenplay, I remember the silence at the other end of the line, and she said, "Oh my God, you can't make this movie, how horrible, I'll have to walk out of the theater." When she read the screenplay, she understood. She was still nervous about the misinterpretation. She's seen it 14 times. And I cannot tell you what it means to me to have made a film my mother can see repeatedly that is not offensive to her, because I take her as one of the most sort of strong and yet feminine women I have ever met, and that was great.
Was it always ended that way?
Always.
That was the original ending?
Always.
That is
My writing the screenplay was contingent upon it being a dream. When I was approached with the story idea, I was fascinated by it and wanted very much to add the metaphor of the Venus de Milo, and that was sort of where my association came, because I didn't see it as horrific, although emotionally I had been both the cutter and the amputated. And so I knew that that was where the pain and the darkness was, and that was the feeling trapped. And yet, knowing that neither of us had intended to do it was what spooked me, that it almost happened because we just wanted to love each other, and it wasn't going to work. And so I was lost in, you know, all that craziness. You know, the world of being obsessed is what ran Carl's in my life through that entire experience. It really, really did. He was in a, you know, heavy-duty sort of space, and I was in a heavy-duty space. Carl and I, more specifically Carl, but we've been asked many times, do you think that the trial and all of this sort of independent and, you know, big star deal is going to ruin independent films for big stars? And I feel like, my God, you do realize that we're looking at it incorrectly if you've even posed the question. Truth be known, there should be nothing more appealing now than independent companies and independent producers, because they are loyal till the end. There was no trap set. These were people who were fighting for the film and nothing else. You know, there was no money-hungry quality to this. This was about the story, and all we wanted was then give us this back so we can go off and do it. And there was the idea that it be looked upon as a negative, when I thought, God, these are the people I want to grow old with. You know, so I think it's a testament, too, to Carl. And Carl is a loyal, wonderful guy, and all directors and actors should be as fortunate as I was and our actors were.
You know, one thing that wasn't brought up, and you were sort of circling it, and that is the word execution. Because Boxing Helena could have been exploited in a more typical Hollywood fashion. It could have had production design similar to Silence of the Lambs, where there's this deserted pit. Or a film like Texas Chainsaw Massacre, and be sheer horror and terror. To produce a movie and direct a movie the way we did, particularly this film, we went the long route, the hard way, and what we did was the exact opposite. Instead of having some creaky old mansion or a scary old house or basement, it was a palatial estate. Instead of having somebody looking terrible in not being bathed or groomed or taken care of, the more we removed her limbs, the more beautiful we made her. We maintained her power. And even at the point where Nick had removed her arms and the audience was seeing this reveal for the first time, instead of what you would expect, which would be crying and sobbing, why did you do this to me? She laughs him out of the room. It's absurd. But that's the power of your dream, to make all these things happen, because ultimately the movie was about control and power.
Jennifer, your addiction to coffee is legendary.
Yes.
I mean, you have, they say that when, Jennifer, they say when you die, you won't be dead. It'll be 3 years before.
I'll still be walking around.
They can still get work out of you for 3 years. Carl, remember that. And you won't have to pay her.
Whisper in her ear and she'll type for you.
Going. As a matter of fact, rumor has it that you have a photograph of coffee is like a big thing in your life, and you actually have a photograph that you carry around with you all the time.
Oh yes, it's a permanent photograph.
Can I see it?
It's a steaming cup of coffee.
A steaming cup of coffee
with my
hot
signature coming out of the steam. It's not my name per se, but it's a little insignia I've done since I was 7 years old. Hollywood Alternative, the Hollywood sign, alternative in typewriting. I'm a writer. Because my grandmother will probably see this, coffee as my alternative to all other evils. And it also stands for the sort of art house I lived in with a bunch of other wacky experimental folks.
I like that. I mean, people need to know, because when they're watching this, they want to know how they can go out and make boxing Helena. So you need to get
Coffee.
a tattoo.
It's a lot of coffee. It's I don't condone the cigarettes, but those are involved. And I'm usually up at 2 in the morning. So, you know, if I get an idea at 11 o'clock in the morning, that's when I need to wake up and do something about it.
Boxing Helena's done. It's in the can. It's on the screen. People are going to enjoy it for a long, long time to come. And my feeling is that it's going to be written about probably more in the future than it has even been written today, because I think that once the lawsuit and everything else finally does get put into the ground and it's over, people will be able to look at this film a little bit cleaner in terms of what it was. Carl, let me ask you this. On the horizon, Boxing Helena's done. What's the future for Carl?
I live by a different ethic than Hollywood does. I'm not interested in making 50 movies before I die. I'd be happy making 10 quality movies before I die. They're like, how do I say it? Every film is like a child, and every child has certain assets, and other childs have certain learning disabilities, and you have to treat them like such. You really have to baby it from conception through sort of graduation. And it's an art form, and as a producer, that's a conflict for you, because you know, it's money versus art, business versus art, and that's always going to be a conflict of interest. And I think that if you maintain your focus on the product first and make that your primary concern to produce that motion picture to the finest of your ability, and if it can't be made for a low budget, save it until you can make it properly, or don't make it at all. If you live by those rules, I think you make quality movies.
And Jennifer, it's your turn. I mean, what's on the line for you besides cigarettes and coffee?
Lots of cigarettes and coffee. And you know, I have to say, I thank you very much for the comment you made about people paying more attention to it now, and sort of, you know, that forgiveness being in there and the openness. Even if they were to hate it 2 years from now, I feel like it'd be more of a sort of a pure look at things. And the one thing I'm trying to do for myself now in the future, I guess, is maintain and not lose, as a result of all the brouhaha, my curiosity. Because that was so much, what was so much fun about the entire project, is that I would never say, I'm making a film to share something with people. I'm sharing an education, I'm sharing a question, I'm trying to do something with other people, because it's the only way I can get objectivity, and the only way to sort of, in my opinion, learn something. And so I'm being curious in novel form right now. Writing a novel and shooting a few commercials, and hopefully we'll be, you know, working with Carl in the future again.
So, Carl, thank you. Jennifer, thank you very much.
Thank you.
And we look forward to more work.
Appreciate it.